Siri Syarahan, ACIS, TCLC. Syarahan pada hari ini adalah syarahan yang kali kedua lah, yang merupakan kerjasama antara pihak ACIS, UiTM Perlis dengan Pusat Kajian Tun Tan Cheng Lock di Utah. Okay, untuk hari ini, so kami berasa berbesar hatilah dengan kesudian TS Ang Kok Yew, yang lebih kenali sebagai Simon dalam Utah, untuk kerana kesudian beliau untuk membentangkan hasil kajian beliau yang berkaitan dengan opera Cina dalam negara kita. So saya rasa dalam kajian TS Ang, so beliau telah berjaya mengetahui beberapa masalah-masalah, isu dan juga cabaran yang dihadapi oleh opera Cina dalam negara kita. Dan saya rasa kita wajar kongsikan bersama dengan semua rakyat Malaysia. Patut tahu kerana opera Cina merupakan satu seni tradisi orang Cina yang sebenarnya kalau kita lihat isu dan cabarannya lebih kurang sama dengan seni-seni tradisional yang lain. Right? So untuk pengetahuan para peserta syarahan kita pada hari ini, TS Ang ialah timbalan dekan Fakulti Industri Kreatif Universiti Tunku Rahman, dan beliau memegang portfolio pembangunan pelajar dan latihan industri. So tanpa melengahkan masa, saya menjemput TS Ang untuk membentangkan hasil-hasil kajian beliau. Silakan TS Ang.
Okay, terima kasih kepada semua peserta. Terima kasih Dr. Chin kerana atas pengenalan tadi. I will just share my sharing today both in bilingual, of course in Malay and English. But before that, please give me a moment to share my screen. Okay, hold on now. Okay, I think everyone should be able to look at my screen right now. JY, okay? All right, thank you. Okay, jadi I will just talk in both, as I said just now, I present this research of mine, my PhD research in the Chinese opera in Malaysia settings, right? So as we know, Chinese opera, it's basically Siqi or Ta Si, as we know in Malaysia, and also in Malay, what we call as opera Cina. Right, I will just give a brief introduction first before we move on. So, Chinese opera is a form of a musical theatre that is performed by usually a small troops of performers using varieties of traditional Chinese instruments, right? And it was first introduced in the Tang Dynasty, and those people who are performers during that time back then in the Tang Dynasty, the performers are usually called as the disciples of the Pear Garden, right? They are the people who are so interested in the performing arts because of the emperor itself, during the Tang Dynasty. So at the time, of course, the early forms of the performance of Chinese opera are quite plain. Right, but over the time, then opera Cina berevolusi juga into various much more complex kind of arts, where they put in more music, more literature, song and dance, and also acrobatics as well, and literature art, and what we have seen today until what we have today. But of course, what we compare today is much more complex, even compared to the basic times when it was first introduced back then in the Tang Dynasty, right? So in the sense of Malaysian context, of course, the Chinese opera atau opera Cina ni dibawa daripada nenek moyang kita yang berasal daripada negara China, right? Back then in pada era 90-an, when it came in, and of course it represents religious symbols to the Malaysian Chinese, and it represents the uniqueness and the performance arts that includes all the singing, the performance, and the acrobatic as well, right? As I mentioned just now. So when, of course, Chinese opera was brought into Malaysia Malaya that time. Of course, now it's Malaysia. It was performed in a few dialects such as in Hokkien, Teochew, Hakka, Cantonese, and Fuzhou, which we still look at this type of dialects being performed in such days, but a very rare occasions that we are able to actually get to enjoy this type of arts again, which I will then discuss later on in my presentation here. But before we move on, of course, we need to know what is Chinese opera. Basically, these are the general and the main characters that we have in a Chinese opera play. It doesn't necessary to have all, tak semestinya semua karakter ni akan bermain dalam opera Cina ini pada sesuatu masa, right? The male usually is called as Sheng, and the female is Tan. Painted face is Jing, and we have Chou, the comedic kind of character, right? Of course, back then, back in the earliest time, all these characters are being performed by males performers because female performers are not allowed to perform, right? Due to a lot of reasoning, right? Perhaps if you have question why they are not allowed to perform, you can ask me later on. So even a male needs to portray a female's character. So I believe back then the drag kind of culture has really started in the Chinese culture, right? So then, of course, when we move into what's happening today, the modernity of our entertainments, right, and the choices of our entertainments also, it causes Chinese opera to be rapidly forgotten by our younger generation today, right? Because it's the failing rate of Chinese opera being get to adapt to our changes and to be staying relevant, to be seen as a relevant art. So it then being culturally viewed as inappropriate for a lot of our younger generation nowadays. And then basically it has been becoming traditionalized in a form that the art itself, it becoming dia menjadi sejenis apa orang kata art yang menjadi traditional lah on its own, right? So tetapi bagi kita orang Cina, the Chinese opera performance actually reflects a very special and fundamental kind of unique punya identity, yeah. So sebelum kita move on, Chinese operas, kita kena faham lah dalam performing opera Cina ni, there's a lot of things that being happens inside in a show, right? Where they have a lot of combinations of vocal techniques, acting skills, stylized movement to convey characters and the emotions and the narrative of the character itself. So first of all, is the vocal techniques. We're usually being what we see the Chinese opera nowadays is, or even back then, they usually perform in a very high-pitched singing songs, or when they converse with each other, they use very kind of traditional language or dialects. Yeah. So singing styles, of course, it also differs between different kind of Chinese opera being performed. In Beijing, we have Jingqu or Gongqu, right? The Cantonese opera is usually being known as Yuequ, right? We also have Caozhouqu, Teochew opera, Fujianqu, also the Hokkien troops. So different troops might have different ways of performing, and different dialects also have different kind of story and different ways of for them to perform, right? So each of these style has its own unique characteristics, I would say, and it really depends on which type of regionals where they come from. Yeah. So for expressive techniques, of course, the Chinese opera's performance usually needs to be specifically trained from very young age, or they needs to have a very long way of training before they are able to perform on the stage. So every little details counts. That includes the facial expression and the hand gestures they are trying to show, right? So these techniques actually added more emotions, color, or drama effects to the performance itself, right? So this is basically a Chinese opera. And go on, of course, the makeup, right? What we can see usually, I won't use the word heavy makeups because I don't think it's appropriate. I would think it's dramatic makeup where we don't apply as in today, right? You can see that's very, very dramatic kind of makeups on the eyebrow, on the face, which I will go and show some pictures later on. And certain part of the heads needs extensions, especially for females characters, right? They have headgears, so we don't wear that anymore, right? So it represents the social status back then, and also it has something to do with the historical periods of that Chinese dynasty that's actually happening, right? Acrobatics and martial arts also being included into the Chinese opera's performance, where they need to perform all these martial and physical skills that they need to, like fighting scenes. Then they have to do somersaults, that kind of, performing skills. Then we also have staging and props. Staging, as in Malaysia settings, usually Chinese opera is being performed in the Chinese temple, right? And a very rare occasion, Chinese opera will be able to perform in I would say, an appropriate space, unless they have a right funding or being dijemput untuk perform di sesuatu tempat, for maybe an official formal kind of event. So they will then get to present there, right? And of course, we have music and orchestra. Chinese opera is so special that they are usually performed with the Chinese instruments, right? Chinese instrumentals, where it's basically gongs, drums, and guzheng, and all those kind of different Chinese instruments to help to make the performance more lively. Yeah. And then comes to this part, is where can we actually see Chinese opera? Then we have these questions. Now, a Chinese opera usually performed and dedicated to a lot of religious related event, I would say, in Malaysia right now, which is what in my research being found out that, right? And how actually the younger generation perceive the Chinese opera as it is today. Now, as I mentioned to you just now, that Chinese opera was first found by the Tang Dynasty's emperor, and it was supposed to only perform to the emperors. But as for what we have today, it is mostly performed during the Hungry Ghost Festival, where you can see the status have changed very big gap, right? And sometimes we also will see Chinese opera being troops being get to perform in the temple during some Sentan, which means the deity's celebration or the deity's birthday during that month, right? So in the lunar calendars, right? So we will follow our Chinese lunar calendar to make sure that what month has what deity's celebration. Some temples, Chinese temple, will actually invite the troops to perform to the deities as a form of offering, right? And as an entertainment to the deities to make sure they are happy. But of course, back then in Malaysia, the Chinese opera also being performed during funerals. This is something that I think maybe a lot of people who didn't know, because we don't see that anymore. And in the Chinese customs, even funeral nowadays are being simplified, where the Chinese people just like, I tried to everything to get symbols, and they will just hire a third party to manage everything to settle the whole funerals properly. But then, yes, Chinese opera is also being performed in the funeral, but it's a very, very rare occasion that I would say that it's going to happen again, where I don't think, as you know, our generation grow, we don't want this type of entertainment to be performed during the funeral. So that's why I would say that we can see the changes in this type of trends nowadays. Yeah. So of course, my issue in my what I've get in throughout my study is I felt like it's a waking up call for us, all the Chinese people, like how can we actually help to get the Chinese opera to being actually get remembered, at least spark some interest to our younger generation nowadays, to at least know what is this art for. So it then comes to my idea is, what if I integrate it with some technology elements and modern non-technological elements to help to see whether it helps to rejuvenate the whole look of Chinese opera into something that is much more contemporary and relevant to them, right? Then, yeah, of course, in Malaysian Chinese opera, we will see this sort of very popular stories. I think some of you even have watched before on the TV, like Journey to the West. But of course, it was not performed in the Chinese opera settings, right? Maybe it's a drama series. Right, I think there's a few. Madam Whitesnake by Sir John is also a very popular story being performed in the Chinese opera settings, and of course Tai Fa. But this is, I think Tai Fa is more focused on the Cantonese troupe, where they only perform that. You won't see Tai Fa being performed in the Hokkien troupe or the Teochew troupes. Yeah, so different troupes might also have different kind of story that they want to perform. Yeah, it is because certain stories just fit into certain dialects, you know, unless they wanted to change it or translate it into different dialects, so they maybe want to perform it, right? So maybe I will just show you one of the examples. This is the settings that we can see in Malaysia setting. Chinese opera usually being performed in the temple, where people, usually the elderly, they will sit on the plastic chair and then very uncomfortable position. Because it's a temple now, you cannot expect it really act on, right? Or maybe possibly a few times, and then being performed by some unknown performers. You don't know who is this auntie. Because they have been practicing way back earlier, they usually form up. Then we'll later talk about why we are lacking of. This is the normal setting that we see. Of course, you can hear from the background is the fire sound is being played by a few of maybe people, usually male and female, at the backstage. Okay, then comes to here. Chinese opera is so special in a way that I think this shouldn't be forgotten. If you can see from here, it is a very long process, I would say. It's a super duper long process. To get ready before a show or Chinese opera's performance, right? You have to get ready at least 4 to 5 hours prior before. Right, or just on this picture, you can see the teachers has been settling up of course, this is a junior performer. She might need help. For senior performers, usually they can do everything on their own, right? And if you can see on this type of hair extensions, right, it's actually a real hair, the real hair that being donated, or they have to go and purchase from salons, and they have to then set it up and being glued in a glue from natural glue is is from a bark of tree. I've forgotten what it's called, but it's they have to go and purchase something look like a seaweed kind of form of plant, and then they have to wash until the glue came out from the plant itself, and then they just start to glue on their head, and it takes at least 1 hour to get dry, and then they can only start to put some extensions or some accessories to their hair extensions here. That's why I would say it is something that is very tedious. A lot of young people do not want to do it because I don't want to just sit there and this is not saloon, you know, so we're looking at the different settings. So it makes a lot of younger people like, I don't think this is for me because I don't want to spend hours just to sit down there and get all these things to be smacked on my head and my face. And then of course, unless you really have the passions. So if it's not, what I found from my study is the younger generations basically don't have the patience for it, right? And all this detailing from the makeups and all the details that you want to put on the face also needs to be studied and to know what kind of colors you want to put, because different colors will have different meanings on the character itself, right? And it takes a very long time just to set up. You can see from this GIF here, it takes like two hours, I would say, from my observation, the time back then when I go and do this research. It's something that, as I mentioned earlier, it's a very tedious process. So a lot of people, they will just need to sit down there and let the seniors to performance to help to get the extensions ready, especially the female characters, because they have much more things to put on the head compared to the male characters, right? But some male characters do also have this type of hair extensions and headgears, as we can see, right? And yeah, from the whole thing, I think it took quite a long time. Yeah. And then comes to here in Malaysian settings, of course, as I mentioned just now, Malaysian Chinese opera is usually be performed in the temple settings, yeah. But it's very rare occasion that we can see Chinese opera in a proper settings, like in a proper venue with good sittings, I won't say good sittings, maybe comfortable sittings and with proper conditions like aircons. So when you go and watch it, you feel much more comfortable, right? Very rare. And even that, we will then comes to these questions, why I choose rejuvenation, because I felt like it's something that is an agent to close up the gap between the youth and the traditional performance, not just for Chinese opera itself, even for others traditional performance arts like wayang kulit and some classical Indian dance. Why they need to be rejuvenated with some form of a new technological integrations, just to help that it keeps relevance. But we are not talking about changing the whole outlook of the Chinese opera itself. The basic fundamentals of the arts still remain, but we are just going to put in some ways of or elements, new elements, to make it more fresher as it is, right? So then, okay, I will show you one video here. Of course, talking about Chinese opera, we very rarely see it on the big screens. Rarely. There's not much drama, not even movies for us to enjoy, for those who really like it. So, and we don't have that exposures compared to like Hollywood movies, where we also heavily CGI kind of movies, where the young people are more interested, like Marvel's, Avengers, all those kind of movies. So they will like it because it's something very heroic. They can feel like relevant to them. But in Chinese opera, of course, it's not given the same opportunity, I would say. But I think back in 2020, Hong Kong then came out with this one movie. I will show you the trailer. It's a very rare situation we can see people still want to produce this type of movie. I think it's in 2020. So this is by Sir Zhuan. It's a Madam White snake. This is the Madam White snake. So you see everything they shoot in the green screen studio. Yeah. Which a much more, I would say, fresher look compared to later I show you some older one, yeah.
你這發射
You know, you see, both CGI are great, something that's much more new, more contemporary, I would say.
你要端葉如望千塵，依忽湖方可力打劍。
我呸！日間呢情我願，愛了昨日嘅眼，慣了那佛的事，逆了那裏的氣。
人若無情，不如要；只要有情，要亦人啊！
若是天理不許愛，我與他千年緣生，又是為何？我的緣。
Okay, so sadly, this movie was not a hit, I would say, and it's not. You can even in Malaysia we cannot get to view it. So if you're really interested to see this movie, you have to find a way to go to the internet and watch it, right? So because it was not released in Malaysia, and I think they only released back then in Hong Kong, and this movie. I think they also did not have any good marketing at that time because they do know there's not much market on this type of movie. So, but I appreciate the whole, the producers' efforts and the performance because it's not easy to come out with something that they already know. It's kind of like a dying performing art, but they are trying their very level best to make this thing up again, right? But compared to our Malaysian settings and to China, to Taiwan and Hong Kong, of course, our settings in Malaysia here are way more lacking of because we do not have much more amenities and also education system as compared to the countries that I've mentioned just now. Right? Maybe also later we can discuss on this part, like here. In Malaysia, if you are interested to join a performance troops, right? It is something that you have to go and talk to the performance troops and to make sure that they wanted to take you as a student, right? So it's an informal way of education. We don't teach that in school. But compared to a country like Hong Kong, they have their own Academy of Chinese Opera, where we don't have. In Beijing, they also have a very famous Chinese Opera's Academy. But in Malaysia, sadly, we don't have any, right? Where usually all those Chinese performers, they just do it out of their passions. So they learn from their seniors last time, and then they got to know what it is, and they start to perform on their own liking, and they practice, and then they start to, continuously transfer the knowledge to the younger generation if there is anyone who is interested. But if it's not, then you stop there. There's something very sad to me because I feel like we need to have a more formal way of educations to educate our younger generations, who knows, who are showing the interest but don't know where to go and don't know how to embark to this education journey. Because compared to like Chinese instruments, the Huayue Tuan. We do have that in our Chinese school syllabus, right? Some schools, Chinese schools, they do teach this stuff. They even have clubs to teach this type of Chinese instrumentals class. But for Chinese opera, do not have. So I think that's why it creates a huge gap in our Malaysian settings here, right? And then comes to this, even what I have mentioned just now, the Chinese opera happening during the Hungry Ghost Festival months, it also faces its own competitions. If we are Chinese decent people, we should know that usually we go to a temple nowadays, what we will see or see is called Getai, right? We always get to know this type of thing because the music is loud and the performance sings much more newer song compared to Chinese opera where no one knows what is performed due to the dialects performed and the storyline, the story, you know, everything is just old school to us, right? So of course, as a person, you will more attracted to something that's newer, you know, more attractive. So you choose something that is, of course, feel like we can relate to, right? Like K-pops, even though we don't understand the language, but we can appreciate the tunes, the melodies of the musics, right? And of course, like what we shown just on the movies itself, we want something that is much more in trance, more heavily CGI, they have storylines like love storylines and whatnot. But of course, love storylines, it could be something very subjective because, of course, in Chinese opera, we also have love story, but we just don't want that anymore because it's so long time ago and it's the same thing, same scripts over and over again. So Chinese opera itself also faces its own competition and hence making it much more hard to survive nowadays, right? And it becomes such an exclusive arts, I will say, I will use the words exclusive as in, it is also not so popular because it has not much demand, right? And even though it's being invited to, the troops being invited to perform in a proper space like performing spaces like DPAC, KLPAC, but it also creates the gap in between the demand and the performance itself because that's not much and it's not enough to sustain the art itself as what it is today, right? Of course, of all those not so good kind of news, but we also have very notable performances in Malaysia that we can actually look up to and, you know, see up to maybe those people who are really trying very hard to keep the art itself alive. As you can see in the picture here, I call teacher Go Lingo, but her true name is Go Hui Ling. She's a good friend of mine. She's a Teochew performance Chinese opera troupe. She is the boss of a museum in Penang. Oh, she owns her own space. But I also talk a lot with her, like how can we actually help to sustain the market itself of the younger generation to appreciate this art more. And next to her picture is her mom, actually, Madam To Ai Hua. Right, she is also 10, if I'm not mistaken, is 10 notable persons performance in Malaysia, because they are it's a family-owned business. So they are trying very hard to strive on to ensure this art is being continued, right? And next to her is Madam Choi King Hong. Is also a very popular teacher in the Cantonese troops. Yep. So why we need to have graduation? Because I felt like our younger generation nowadays starts to lost the identity of Chinese opera. We just don't know what it is about. It is a very sad thing looking at the situation where if we go to Chinese temple, when we have a Chinese opera performance, the younger generation maybe will just take out their phones and snap some photos on the Instagram and put some filters, and then they just let go without understanding the core and the value of the Chinese opera to themselves, right? of course, there's a lot of factors that chuck in. Part of it is the dialect being performed of the Chinese opera. The dialect here, because the younger generation, some of they don't speak dialects, as in Hokkien, Teochew, Fuzhou, even Cantonese, because Mandarin is the lingua franca of our Chinese school, and we don't have dialects classes. So to understand dialects or to learn dialects is you have to learn from home. And looking at the young parents also, they don't really speak dialects nowadays, some. So it makes things much more worse, as in then the whole dialect has just gone dead. So when they go out and they look at this type of performance, they don't understand what the performance is actually singing. So a lot of time then we will see the Chinese opera troops, what they are trying to help with that to solve temporarily is to put up LCD screens to put they put the translations or some wordings. But this also don't help because some Chinese cannot read Chinese. Yes, push English, but sometimes the English, when it's translated to the Chinese, when translated to the English, the meanings a bit run away. So maybe the appreciation also depreciate from there, right? But of course, as I mentioned, there's a lot of factors that check in. Of course, environment is part of it because in the temple settings, it's very humid, crowded sometimes if the temple is a very popular one. And geographical location also plays an important factors. The urban kids might not have much more, from what my findings, they don't really get to expose to this type of arts compared to the kids from smaller villages or small town, right? Because like places like in KL, really hard for you to really get this type of art unless performance art, performing troops being invited to perform in KL Pack or PJ Pack, right? So if it's not done, they will never know. They only have to go to YouTube and look at it. Oh, then they will know, oh, this is Chinese opera, which the whole ideas and the whole experience might differs, right? So then, of course, there's a lot of efforts coming in to help to rejuvenate and to put in the efforts to bring in the interest, to spark the interest in the younger generation. But one of it is by this, I will show you the examples, which is to integrate Chinese operas and a song in modern songs. So I think this song is quite popular. Okay.
说了神仙家要救出国宝，汉朝正统；有人说了挟天子以立诸侯，终会被他掌控；有人死守浙江，东思索这投降还是北风；有人为了金钱为女人成为三姓家狗。传说在隆中郊区有个人叫做孔明，才刚满27，天文地理胜过广中乐毅，期待着伯乐明军旗手掌天下统一，一直到三顾茅庐冲锋沙场高举军旗，不停的落战，水来土掩兵来将挡，砍下了军队，誓言要让地方高扬，逼到了城墙，轰战。 就火光，就算再不堪带仗，也不能投降。眺望着北方，曹军会说驻扎洛阳，荆州和长江，落败失守都是遗憾。弟兄再强悍再狂，终究不抵挡。我共向北方，为理想而战，高耸古老的城墙，挡不住欲望。我共向北方，走到九十。
So what we are looking here is we have to understand from my research is the future waiting for Chinese operas in Malaysia is something that we need to wake up right now, everyone. We need to play our own parts, even the governments, the NGOs, everyone's, because it is a very important art to us, I would say, as a Chinese descendants, right? To change the perspective of our younger generations looking at Chinese opera as a religious performance, because when I first asked them, what do you think about Chinese opera? They will say it is an art for the dead, because it was they have the idea of Chinese opera is only performed during the Hungry Ghost Festival. So yeah, perhaps I will show you a bit more if I have a bit more time here. Let me stop my screen. Just for everyone's noting here, besides this type of old school Chinese operas being performed. We also have different type of Chinese opera, like puppetry. Hold on, yeah. Let me share my screen. Okay, I won't play it on full screen. Right. This is a potehi, all right, something that is very dearly to the Hokkien community. It's a puppetry, hand puppetry Chinese opera. Oh, this is something that way
要请八仙同齐到在腰地金宫，来向金庙娘娘贺寿。李东斌就安尼来向了个汉江里那个叫起咯。
In small town, the temples might perform this sort of. This is a Hokkien puppet. So usually they will use 3 fingers in the puppet hand, and the 2 fingers here is the hand movement. In Penang, maybe we can still see this sort of art. Okay, then I move on to the next one. This is also potehi, but it's in different kind of way. Something that I feel is very special. Yeah, very special. So, maybe on the bottom of this page, there's only 2 persons holding 2 puppetry at one time. Also, it needs skills because you need to know how to move. This is something that is very dearly to the Hokkien community. Yeah. Then we have in Taiwan, they also have a series, but nowadays no more. This is back when they also have their own version, and they even make it into the national TV. Of course, in Malaysia, we don't have that, right?
我不记人，表面上讲法定维持武林正义，实际上却是将武林经为混乱。
Okay, then we have this very special iron rod puppetry. This is usually being performed by the Hokkiens and the Teochew troops. To show you, it's very different compared to the potehi, as in it is controlled by 2 iron rods, which weigh about 2 kilos, the whole puppet. So if you don't have the energy to control and to hold it, actually it's a very hands-on kind of exercise compared to the potehi that I just shown you just now, right? So in Malaysia, we do have different kind of it's not just the one that we have seen in the temple by the human performance. We also have this sort of puppetry. Yeah. So perhaps I will just stop it here. If we can open for Q&A maybe for 10 minutes. Is it okay, Dr. Chin? Or you want me to continue to show some examples?
Yeah. I think you can we can stop for a while, right? So to for participants who ask any relevant questions to the presentations earlier, participants, you may post your questions into our chat box.
Okay. Okay, maybe one more I will show. This is something very special that I found. Chinese opera being performed in Bahasa Melayu. But you can see the video is so long time. Pardon for the
Saman, we have a question from our participant. Right? So the question is, bolehkah pemuzik opera Cina melakukan suatu persembahan tanpa pelakon seperti orkestra?
Kejap, I think bolehkah pemuzik opera Cina melakukan sesuatu? Oh, boleh. Dia tak semestinya kena tahu bermain musical dalam orkestra tu, as in dia being trained as a performance sahaja. So boleh, no, tak ada masalah. So it's something that very rare also. Yeah.
Okey, tapi maksudnya kalau kita kita tak ada performer untuk Chinese opera, adakah ia masih lagi membawa maksud opera, Chinese opera kalau tak ada pelakon,
stage tu.
tak ada pelakon.
Jadi saya rasa soalan ini sangat terus terang lah. Kalau tanpa pelakon opera Cina tu, maka tidak jadilah kisahnya sebuah lakonan opera Cina tu. Sebab jiwa satu persembahan opera Cina tu bergantung kepada pelakon tu juga. Jadi tanpa pelakon tu saya rasa tidaklah menjadi the whole thing. Kalau hanya musical saja, dia akan menjadi persembahan instrumental Cina sajalah. Dia bukan satu persembahan opera Cina. Ya. Yeah.
Okey. Baik. Saya rasa okey. Ya.
Yes.
So actually, this also even though I understand Cantonese, but I cannot understand what is speaking. Okay, so I don't have chances to see all the things like I saying all the things. So how far do you think that? Because I don't think youngster, not even youngster my age, so we say my age. So I don't think any of us exactly can do this. So those who can do, I think they learn better than us.
Yeah, they consist.
So which is like near future thing.
You can. That's why we are so worried about this art itself. We need to have the younger bloods to come in. Okay, so Chinese also I never see there is anything in school for why you not but this one is because I'm down here. Oh yeah, Indian dance. Yes. Correct. No, sadly to tell you that Chinese opera, we don't have a proper formal education. Like what you have mentioned just now, Indian classical dance, maybe some they can send to place. We have a place called the Temple of Fine Arts in Brickfields, where they still teach the Bharatanatyam's, dances to the kids. When Chinese opera, we don't have that. That's why in my presentation just now, I was telling, if they want to learn, any children that is interested, they have to go according to, yes, and then they have to learn it from the very beginning. That's why I've been working closely with my teacher friend here, the Lingo, where she also realized this problem very early. So she started to have this clustered young beginners class for the children to learn how to play musical first before they enter to a different stage, the presentation stage. So then she feedbacks to me, it's like, to learn all this Chinese opera is actually not easy, because there's a Chinese saying like, you learn 10 years of work, then you only perform 1 minute on the stage. So there's a lot of hard work, because like some children, when they go to this teacher and learn, right, they start to like quit after 3 weeks, because they just feel like, oh, this is very hard, because they need to learn all the hand gestures, the acrobatics, their legs need to be pulled up. Then they were like, okay, maybe this stuff. It's a lot of patience and hard work, I would say. This is not a problem in our country itself. In China also, it's the same thing. Yeah, so it's something that I would say we must look seriously, put more time to work all parties together to see how can we actually help to sustain this art itself. Right. Maybe I will show one more examples, like a good rejuvenations. You see from this wayang kulit, you can see the screen, right? Yeah, so wayang kulit is also something that I feel like we don't really see nowadays, So then these troops are also a friend of mine, his name is Tin Toy. He's currently in Japan performing this. He then think of, oh, how can I put in something new characters into wayang kulit? So then he loves Star Wars very much. So he put all the Star Wars character into the wayang kulit form. So you see, but it's still performed in the wayang kulit settings. I'm not sure you can hear. So then you see the title is then changed to Perangan Bintang, which translated to Star Wars. Just to ensure maybe we can take in some new blood from the Malays, Chinese, sorry, the wayang. Yes, it's not easy. Yes. There are some simplified version of Chinese opera where they don't have much dramatic makeups. Like, hold on, maybe I'll show.
So in order to like keep all this in the nowadays people have no patience. Cannot wait for 10 years.
Okay, maybe I search her. If you, but this is back then lah. Nowadays we don't really see, where they change Chinese opera into a drama form, drama series. Of course, they don't have much more makeup compared to the. Let's skip this ads. Sorry, guys. Right. Oh, one more. Thanks, YouTube. Right. Okay. Yeah. This type of Taiwan. She's a very popular Taiwan actress, Yang Li Hua. So. Is totally quite different because they don't use the dramatic makeups, but it's in a form of series. They don't have dramatic makeup, so they still remain the singing, the gesture of performing, but without this kind of makeup. But maybe it's a bit different, the feeling, because I feel like actually the dramatic makeup makes Chinese opera what I mean, it's a good approach and it has been back then, but this type of drama also stopped being produced due to the more demand. Back then, I have to watch it with my babysitter when I was a kid. That's why the interest in me was then inculcated slowly when I was younger, until up to today. Yeah, so perhaps I would just make a very short kesimpulan from here. It's like we need to look at art itself is a very precious thing to our country because setiap negara mempunyai kelebihan masing-masing. Jadi in a multi-racial country like us, somehow we are so rich of this type of culture. I think we need to make something to sustain and to make our art can be continuously being enjoyed by our younger generation. So yeah, it's a wake-up call, but it's not too late. So by all means, I think rejuvenations can help, and we need to help to inculcate the interest into our younger generation here. Yeah. So thank you so much for today. I think I pass back the floor to Dr. Chin.
Okay, thank you very much, Simon. So I think there's one question for you, Simon, from Ms. Ng. Yeah.
Is it from Miss Ng?
Yes.
Thank you so much in sharing. Does that mean the singer sang a song with the Commission of Modern Kind of Singing? Sound this not this was so singing like. Miss Ng, I think maybe this is not I won't say it's not a good combination, but it's a mixture of genres and trying to see whether it works or not, because I believe in arts, there's no right or wrong. There's no such terms. We can always experiment on it. And when it works, of course. Of course, there's some arts that also does not work. But in this case, when Chinese opera being gel with more modern music and more tunes. So I think it actually helps to create a fresher look, and hopefully it then give the feedbacks of the younger generation that they feel like, oh, maybe I can still listen to this type of old tunes without having it to be performed in the original form. But then since it's a new form of being performed, I got something more fresh, you know, so it triggers the interest in me. So hopefully then, you know, they will get to understand this type of art itself. That's why our concern here is to make sure the art is being sustained and can be enjoyed in the future generation. Because our concern is also like, we are so worried that it will be forgotten because there's no new blood coming in to learn to appreciate this art. We don't want it just to be Instagram filters like hashtag Chinese opera, and that's all. You know nothing about it, right? So I think hopefully I answer your questions. Yeah, by helping to promote it also, yeah, in a way. Yep.
Okay, so we welcome more questions from the participants. Any more questions? Okay, so I think it's interesting. Right? So this topic is very interesting. I think one of the questions brought up by Ms. Ng just now is about whether a traditional art, be it Chinese opera, wayang kulit, makyong, and so on, will it be still considered as an art, right? A traditional art if it has changed, you know, certain components of it, right? So yeah, so can you elaborate more on that, Simon? Right? So if we change, like for example, Chinese opera without the Chinese opera makeup, so is it still Chinese opera?
Okay, I think if we use the word change, we must be very careful in the sense that we do not want to change the fundamental of it. We can experiment, but not totally change. If it's totally changed, then it is no longer a Chinese opera form, obviously. But there must be a certain elements that we have to keep, and you know, maybe be a bit playful or cheeky, I would say, to see whether it works in the sense of like whether it helps to fit in our nature of our entertainment needs today or not. Because obviously the old way of Chinese opera is not really being accepted, and our perceptions has changed definitely from art that is being watched by an emperor now is being watched by ghosts. So I think this is very important for us to change the perspective first. We need to have an idea that it is an art for humans, and you know, it's something very beautiful, something that we need to sustain. But if we want to change, not the whole outlook of it, but there must be something that we must still remain, I would say. Yeah.
Okay, right. So thank you for the explanation. Right. So I would like to ask Simon also, and so about this question. So I think if you look at most of our traditional arts, so it is traditional because we call it traditional. What do you think, Simon?
It's traditional is because we perceive it as traditional. Okay, I will say that. Even traditional art can be modern and contemporary, but it will need to have extent of maybe a bit of mixture. We don't want to cut out the whole the outlook of it, you know. So tradisi tu masih perlu dijalankan, you know, disimpan, tapi kita boleh bermainlah sikit-sikit elemen tu di sini sana, you know, just to change some ideas of how it can be more interesting to fit, as I say lah, to fit into our nature of our entertainment needs nowadays. So if you can see nowadays, even like Malay's songs, I realize they like to play with some lullaby, you know, traditional lullaby to the modern music, and it sounds good. So I think it's, yeah, something it makes it more fresh. So I won't say why not.
Okay, right. Okay, so I think to sum up, so I'm not sure whether Simon agree with me or not. Right. So if we, you know, traditional, whatever type of traditionalization, I would say, be it art, be it our customs and so on. It is traditional because we see it as traditional, right? Because we perceive it as traditional, and the tradition itself has not changed, right? Has not adapted to the changes of time. So that is why it is seen, right, as traditional. So in order for all these traditionalized arts, customs, and so on to survive, and so I think the way for us to ensure, right, it will be continued is to keep it relevant, right? So the art itself has to adapt. The art itself, the custom itself, anything traditional has to change, right, according to time, right, in order for it to be relevant, right? Okay, so with that, I think we would like to thank TS Simon, right, for sharing your views on traditional Chinese opera in Malaysia. And so I think you have already enlightened us, right, on the problems, right, the issues faced by this art, and you have also explained to us the details that we need to know about Chinese opera. Right. So thank you very much, TS Simon, and thank you very much to all the participants. Right. So thank you for attending this talk. So we will have we intend to have more of this kind of talk. Right. So we should share with staff and students of UITM as well as UTA. So thank you very much for attending.
Thank you.